Mirror Talk Episode 13, Unspoken Rules, the hidden scripts of belonging. Welcome back to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. If you've been journeying through the Inversiverse, the Body Knows, Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, or the Linguiverse and its sister series, the Shadow Spectrum, you already know the terrain we walk together, where language, emotion, and the nervous system meet. Mirror Talk began with the words that shaped our earliest safety, and has since traced how tone, silence, apology, and belonging live in the body long before they live in the mouth. In this new layer, relational mirrors, we step into the social dimension of speech. Here, communication becomes choreography. It's not just what we say, but what our bodies remember while saying it. This episode, Unspoken Rules, explores the invisible contracts that hold our relationships together and sometimes hold us back. These are the patterns written in tone, habit, and hesitation, the unacknowledged deals we make to keep peace, gain love, or avoid loss. Take a breath before we begin. Feel the air move through you, because this isn't only an intellectual inquiry, it's physiological. Every word about safety touches the body first. The language beneath language. We are born into syntax long before sentences. A baby doesn't yet know words, but it knows tone. It knows whether a parent's sheesh means you're safe or be quiet. The vagus nerve and limbic system translates sound into state. Softness signals safety, sharpness warns danger. By the time we can form thoughts, our nervous systems have already mapped the grammar of belonging. This is where unspoken rules originate. They aren't laws written in memory, they're muscle memories of survival. Each family, culture, and community speaks its own emotional dialect. Some teach that quiet means respect, others equate obedience with love, others that visibility invites punishment. These codes live under speech, governing not just what we say, but what we feel allowed to say. In NSL, nervous system language, this is called embodied syntax, when physiological responses become the punctuation of life. A pause can signal caution, a sigh can mean surrender, a half smile can carry an entire childhood of appeasement. The nervous system, ever loyal to its history, continues performing these patterns until consciousness intervenes. Inherited scripts and invisible contracts. By the time we reach adulthood, we are fluent in contracts we never negotiated. They begin with care and calcify into choreography. I'll stay small if you stay close. I'll keep you calm if you keep me. I'll absorb your discomfort so you don't leave. Psychologically, these are attachment adaptations, strategies to preserve proximity. Linguistically, they form an emotional economy. Each phrase is a transaction. Silence exchanged for approval, compliance for affection, performance for belonging. In the mirror linguistic hypothesis, MLH, we understand these dynamics as reflective syntax. Our communication mirrors the emotional logic of our environment. If care was conditional, our speech becomes conditional. I'll say it nicely so they don't get upset. If anger were forbidden, the voice flattens, tone and vocabulary shrink. Eventually, identity itself becomes an accent learned from the people who raised us. This doesn't make us false, it makes us adaptive. The body's first imperative is connection, not truth. But over time, connection's built on suppression fractures. We feel the fatigue of performance, the micro-tension in the jaw, the throat that tightens every time we almost say what we mean. The neuroscience of compliance neuroscience has long confirmed what intuition whispers. Exclusion hurts like injury. When social bonds rupture, the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's pain matrix, lights up as if we've been physically struck. The nervous system, therefore, privileges inclusion above authenticity. The infant who learns that anger pushes love away quickly learns to inhibit anger. The adult who grew up with volatile authority becomes hyper-attuned to tone, reading microsignals for danger before words even arrive. The orbitofrontal cortex continuously predicts social outcomes, shaping behavior to minimize rejection. Each time appeasement restores calm, the brain reinforces it as survival. Over the years, these neural shortcuts form heuristic scripts, automatic patterns that preserve belonging at the expense of self-expression. From a neuropsychological perspective, our unspoken rules are reinforced through dopamine and cortisol cycles. Approval releases dopamine, rewarding compliance. Rejection spikes cortisol, punishing autonomy. The pattern repeats until the nervous system equates obedience with peace. And yet that peace is physiological paralysis. When we say I'm fine through gritted teeth, the body registers conflict. Heart rate accelerates, muscles contract, and the parasympathetic system withdraws. We may sound calm, but our physiology screams. This internal dissonance is the true cost of invisible contracts. Peace purchased by suppression. The linguistics of obedience language itself becomes the enforcer. Certain words carry the vibration of submission. Should, must, have to. They narrow choice and signal urgency, micro-commands that keep the body in sympathetic drive. Others cank, choose, or prefer open space, activating the parasympathetic system's sense of agency. Over decades, our vocabulary quietly scripts our nervous system states. Even punctuation participates, abrupt periods end possibilities, ellipses linger with anxiety, Exclamation marks can mimic forced enthusiasm. Tone, volume, and rhythm, our prosody, reveal whether speech is regulation or reaction. Consider how often we use language to preempt rejection. It's just my opinion, but sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. Each phrase softens truth before it lands, cushioning the speaker against imagined backlash. Linguistically, this is self-erasure disguised as politeness. In MLH, we can view this as defensive semantics, words chosen not to express meaning but to manage perception. The tragedy is that the more we edit for safety, the less we sound like ourselves. Cultural conditioning and collective syntax. These invisible rules aren't confined to families, they're embedded in culture. Western societies often sanctify independence. Don't need, don't cling, stand alone. Yet collective cultures may sanctify conformity. Don't stand out, don't shame the group. Each script demands the suppression of something essential. Even gender teaches its own tonal grammar. Women are socialized to soften, men to withhold. Emotional dialects of power. Religion, schooling, and institutions reinforce them through language. Reflection prompt. Ask yourself, whose comfort does my silence protect? Which rule feels sacred only because it kept me safe once? These aren't accusations, they're invitations. When you notice the rules that run your speech, you don't have to condemn them. You can simply thank them for the safety they offered and choose differently now. The next time you swallow a truth, feel how your throat tightens. That's the body reminding you of an old contract. The next time you say yes when you mean no, notice the micro-tension behind your eyes. Each of these moments is a signature waiting to be rewritten. Unspoken rules lose power the moment they're spoken. When we translate silence into language, repression becomes relationship again between self and self and other, past and present. As we move forward in this episode, we'll explore how these hidden grammars shape our relationships, how the nervous system enforces emotional law, and how we can begin to draft new agreements written in truth instead of fear. Now that we've traced the roots of obedience and belonging, we can begin decoding the grammar of control itself, the linguistic structures that keep these rules in place. In Element 1, we'll map how tone, syntax, and microphrasing sustain invisible hierarchies of power, and how conscious language can begin to loosen them. One more breath. Feel the body you inhabit. The rules we'll study next aren't external. They live in muscle, memory, and meaning, and with awareness, they can finally be rewritten. The grammar of control rarely enters the room shouting. Most often, it hides in tone, in the half-beat between sentences, in the pauses that ask for permission without words. We tend to think of control as domination, but linguistically, it begins as prediction. The nervous system's attempt to keep chaos at bay by shaping sound into certainty. Every should have to, or you always is a small linguistic wall erected against uncertainty. Language, after all, is architecture, and grammar is its scaffolding. The shape of safety. Before a child learns to write, it learns the emotional punctuation of authority. A raised voice becomes an exclamation mark. A silent withdrawal becomes a full stop. An indulgent sigh becomes an ellipsis, something left hanging, dangerous in its ambiguity. Over the years, these micro-lessons crystallize into syntax. Be good. Say please. Don't talk back. Each imperative wires the nervous system to equate compliance with calm. The sympathetic system, the circuitry of fight or flight, learns to downregulate only when the correct linguistic offering is made. So grammar becomes neurology. Tone becomes tether. When we later speak in adulthood, we unconsciously reproduce the same control grammar that once maintained order in childhood. Even when we believe we are choosing our words freely, our phrasing often mirrors the emotional economy of the past. From the NSL, nervous system language perspective, control grammar is simply dysregulated safety. The body senses a potential threat, so the mouth reaches for command. The sharper the edge in the voice, the more the speaker's physiology attempts to restore predictability. Control is not cruelty, it's the nervous system begging for certainty. Authority and syntax control is coded into the very grammar of English. Imperatives, verbs without subjects, are the simplest way to issue orders. Stop. Listen. Wait. The missing you implies power. It presumes the listener's compliance. Over time, we internalize this structure, issuing commands to ourselves with the same syntax. Get over it. Move on. Try harder. In cognitive linguistics, this is called grammatical framing, how the shape of a sentence shapes thought. Sentences that omit agency, mistakes were made, conceal responsibility. Sentences heavy with obligation, I have to, I must, compress freedom. When such grammar dominates daily speech, the nervous system remains subtly contracted, living in perpetual readiness to obey. From the MLH mirror linguistic hypothesis view, this habitual authority reflects mirrored power. The child once spoken to through imperatives learns not only to comply but to imitate. Later, the same cadence appears in their own voice, directed inward or outward, preserving hierarchy long after the authority has gone. The mirror becomes a chain of command. Tone as territory. Listen closely to a conversation between two anxious people, and you'll hear grammar turn territorial. Sentences shorten. Tone sharpens. Words overlap. The tempo accelerates because both nervous systems are trying to regulate through control. In NSL terms, sympathetic activation drives rapid speech, breath shallows, prosody flattens, and rhythm becomes staccato. The listener's body, receiving these cues, mirrors them, escalating the cycle. Control is contagious. The antidote is prosodic safety, the calm rhythm of ventral vagal engagement. When tone slows and breath deepens, grammar itself elongates. What if we pause for a moment? Instead of a command, the phrasing becomes an invitation. This is collaborative syntax, language that restores mutual regulation. Notice how different these feel in the body. Calm down, a demand constricting chest and jaw. Can we slow down, a request, softening breath? The shift is grammatical, but also physiological. The first phrase cues dominance, the second cues partnership. In this sense, every relationship becomes a linguistic ecosystem, either hierarchical or harmonic, depending on rhythm, pronoun, and pause. Microcontrols and emotional editing control rarely declares itself openly. It lives in microphrases designed to manage another's response. Don't be upset. It's fine, I'm fine. I just want you to understand. Each phrase disguises anxiety as care. The speaker edits emotional reality to preserve stability. In NSL, this is a fawn-freeze hybrid. The body dampens its truth to maintain connection. In MLH, it's linguistic mimicry, the self speaking in a tone calibrated to the other's tolerance rather than its own authenticity. Control grammar can also sound benevolent. The over-explainer, the constant reassurer, the chronic manager of everyone's comfort, all enact subtle domination through emotional caretaking. They preempt chaos by anticipating it linguistically. I'll just do it. Don't worry, I've got it. What seems like generosity is often a nervous system clinging to predictability. The neuropsychology of command neuropsychology reveals that language and motor control share neural real estate. Broca's area, responsible for speech production, interacts with the premotor cortex. When we issue a command, even silently, the brain simulates physical action. Control language, therefore, primes movement. It keeps the body poised for enforcement. For chronic controllers, this means perpetual microtension. Neck muscles tightening, breath halting mid-sentence, hands gesturing sharply. Their grammar literally shapes their physiology. When this pattern is mirrored back, someone else speaking in equal authority, the brain perceives threat. Two nervous systems clash like cymbals, each fighting to regulate through dominance. Therapeutically, the goal isn't to silence the command, but to recontextualize it. To teach the body that influence does not require intimidation, and clarity does not require compression. Words can guide without gripping. The linguistics of fear, every controlling statement hides an unspoken plea. Please don't let me lose control. The tone of a manager who micromanages, the partner who interrupts, the friend who insists on the last word, all reveal the same root fear: unpredictability equals danger. The amygdala reads uncertainty as threat. The prefrontal cortex tries to impose order through language. From this angle, control is less about ego and more about regulation. Understanding this allows compassion for self and others. When we hear a loved one's controlling tone, we can translate it through NSL. Their nervous system is bracing. Responding with a slower rhythm and grounded prosody can downshift both bodies from defense to dialogue. This is the practice of linguistic co-regulation, using tone as therapy rather than a weapon. Silence as command. Not all control is loud. Sometimes it wears the mask of composure. Strategic silence, when used to withdraw approval, activates the same fear circuits in others as overt aggression. The dorsal vagal shutdown, the body's freeze mode, reads absence as punishment. The unreturned message, the unanswered question, the pause too long to decode. These are grammatical voids that communicate dominance through omission. In mirror linguistic terms, silence is still syntax. It frames expectation. When repeated, it teaches the other person the unspoken rule: predict me or lose me. Reclaiming agency, therefore, means learning to distinguish sacred pause from punitive silence. One invites reflection, the other enforces hierarchy. Cultural control codes control grammar extends beyond individuals. Cultures themselves develop linguistic hierarchies. Formal address, gendered honorifics, and passive politeness each maintain social order through syntax. English, for instance, places the subject before the verb, subtly centering agency. In Japanese, verbs often conclude the sentence, delaying assertion and preserving harmony. Neither is superior, each encodes a worldview. But when cultural codes become moral absolutes, they imprison authenticity. A British sorry prefacing every request, an American no worries masking discomfort. These are cultural reflexes that sanitize emotion. The body conforms to etiquette, not experience. In global dialogue, recognizing these grammars of control becomes essential. They are not personal quirks, but inherited blueprints of safety. The mirror cage, the mirror linguistic hypothesis, views control of language as a self-mirroring system. The speaker's tone reflects their own fear of them. Imagine an argument where one person insists, just calm down. The command attempts to regulate the other. but instead amplifies agitation. The mirror intensifies the image until both are trapped in reflection. Each word echoes off the other's nervous system, multiplying the original anxiety. The only way out of the mirror cage is transparency, naming the pattern aloud. I notice I'm trying to control this conversation because I feel nervous. Such confession breaks symmetry. Vulnerability dissolves the hall of mirrors. In NSL, this admission cues ventral engagement, the physiology of openness, allowing both parties to recalibrate. Control and the loss of curiosity. At its core, control is the death of curiosity. The nervous system cannot wander and defend simultaneously. When we cling to certainty, we close the linguistic aperture through which empathy enters. Sentences shorten, tone hardens, and imagination retreats. In relationships, this manifests as conversational repetition. The same arguments replayed with new content but identical cadence. Each participant speaks from a script, not discovery. The grammar of control thus becomes the grammar of stagnation. To reclaim curiosity, one must tolerate uncertainty, a physiological act. Breath must remain slow, muscles soft enough to absorb the unknown. Linguistically, curiosity sounds like a question rather than a declaration. Could it be that? Help me understand. Such phrasing signals safety, inviting collaboration instead of compliance. Reclaiming language as choice healing from control grammar does not mean abandoning structure. It means choosing structure consciously. We can still use imperatives, but grounded in consent. We can still set boundaries, but spoken from a calm body, not a body threat. A simple reframe shifts everything. You need to listen. Shifts to I'd like to feel heard. Stop interrupting. Shifts to I want to finish this thought. Agency moves from command to clarity, from policing to presence. In NSL practice, notice how the body responds to each form. The first tightens, the second breathes. The nervous system always tells the truth about tone. The physiology of letting go, releasing control grammar begins in the diaphragm, not the dictionary. Breath is the first sentence of the body. When breath is held, speech becomes clipped. When breath flows, syntax expands. Practice pausing mid-conversation to inhale fully. The body will resist at first, centuries of conditioning whispering that silence equals danger. But soon, stillness becomes tolerance, then trust. Neuroplasticity ensures that with repetition, the body learns new linguistic associations. Calm no longer signals collapse, but coherence. Control dissolves not because we renounce authority, but because we embody enough safety to share it. Reflection prompt. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, where do I use control language to feel safe? Perhaps in parenting, leadership, or even self-talk. Notice the phrases that arise when anxiety does. Do they constrict or invite? Do they shorten breath or steady it? Awareness alone begins to rewrite the grammar. You may find that behind every controlling sentence is a frightened child seeking predictability. Speaking to that part slowly, kindly, transforms grammar into grace. Once the grammar of control is seen, the next layer reveals itself, the architecture it supports. Control is the syntax, contracts are the storylines. They tell us who we must be to stay loved, how we must speak to stay safe, and what we must silence to stay accepted. In element 2, the architecture of invisible contracts will step inside those structures, the family roles, attachment bargains, and cultural codes that script our speech long before choice enters the room. Take one more slow breath. As grammar relaxes, the foundation trembles, and that tremble is freedom beginning. The architecture of invisible contracts every family, friendship, and culture runs on a web of unspoken agreements. Contracts no one signs but everyone feels. They're not written in ink, but in tone, posture, and pause. You learn early what earns warmth and what triggers withdrawal. You learn who you are allowed to be, not by declaration, but by what the room rewards. These are the invisible contracts, the emotional deals that determine belonging. They begin as gestures of survival, but over time they script identity. And like any contract, they come with clauses, some fair, others binding in silence. The family blueprint in most homes, language wasn't neutral, it was currency. Love might have been traded for obedience, peace for silence, attention for performance. You discover quickly which version of yourself keeps the room regulated. Family systems theory calls this role adaptation. The caretaker who absorbs tension, the scapegoat who carries blame, the hero who distracts with achievement, the ghost who vanishes to keep the peace. Each role is a linguistic reflex, a pattern of speech and tone wired to maintain the system's emotional balance. The caretaker says, "It's fine, I'll handle it." The scapegoat says, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The hero says, "Don't worry, I'll fix it." Safety that shrinks you. When safety is defined as the absence of tension, authenticity becomes the enemy. You stop saying the hard thing because you fear the silence that follows. You avoid asking for what you need because the old contract taught you that needs are burdens. You learn to regulate others first and yourself last. This is the paradox of emotional survival. You secure a connection by erasing your shape within it. The nervous system memorizes this pattern. It releases oxytocin not just when you're loved, but when you successfully avoid conflict. Belonging, then, becomes a biochemical reward for self-suppression. The cost? Chronic dissonance. Your words say peace, but your body speaks protest. Your tone agrees, but your muscles brace. Your smile communicates safety while your stomach knots. Each dissonance is a small breach of integrity, a moment where the contract keeps you safe at the expense of truth. Mirror conditioning. The mirror linguistic hypothesis frames invisible contracts as reflexive syntax, patterns that repeat because the mirror of early communication was distorted. If your caregivers spoke love in conditional grammar, I'm proud of you when you're good because, then pride and approval fuse with performance. As an adult, your language mirrors that conditioning. You find yourself saying, I'm only happy if everyone else is okay, or I'll rest when it's done. Each phrase repeats the emotional logic of childhood. Safety equals compliance, worth equals utility. Breaking these patterns requires not rebellion, but translation. You don't need to destroy the mirror. You need to polish it until it reflects reality instead of fear. That begins by hearing your own sentences as evidence of your nervous system's contractions. Ask yourself, which rule keeps me safe but small? Maybe it's the rule that says, don't make anyone uncomfortable. Or the one that whispers, don't outshine them, they'll leave. Or the deeper one still, love equals sacrifice. Naming the rule begins to dissolve it. The body recognizes that the threat it's avoiding no longer exists. The physiology of permission to rewrite a contract. The body must first believe it can survive without it. Polyvagal theory teaches that safety isn't purely relational, it's physiological. The nervous system needs proof, not philosophy. Every time you speak a truth that once felt forbidden and survived the moment after, your vagus nerve learns new data. Honesty doesn't equal exile. That micro-experience of survival rewires both grammar and gut. In NSL, this is called ventral imprinting, new tone patterns paired with parasympathetic calm. The body learns to associate openness with safety. Over time, phrases like I need help or I disagree stop flooding the bloodstream with adrenaline. They become ordinary sentences, not alarms. This is why trauma recovery so often involves voice work, breathing, or gentle articulation. Speech retrain physiology. Words don't just describe healing, they perform it. How hierarchies echo invisible contracts thrive in hierarchical environments, families, workplaces, and cultures of deference. The body remembers who was allowed to interrupt and who was expected to listen. That memory lives in pitch and posture. When you later enter a similar dynamic, the nervous system replays the old hierarchy automatically. Your throat tightens around superiors. Your voice softens around anger. You shrink around authority even when you are one. From the MLH viewpoint, this is echoed hierarchy at scale, a society repeating its emotional grammar generation after generation. Language that once preserved safety becomes language that enforces silence. Breaking this echo requires what we might call linguistic rebellion through regulation. Not shout, the limbic system lights up as though you were the one in pain. Hear laughter, and the same reward circuits activate in your brain. This mirroring mechanism helps us understand others from the inside out, but it also makes us vulnerable to absorption. If your early environment linked love with appeasement, your mirror neurons learn to prioritize harmony over authenticity. You don't just understand other people's feelings, you become them. And because your nervous system equates their calm with your safety, you adapt your speech to soothe them, even at the expense of your truth. In MLH, mirror linguistic hypothesis terms, this is identity resonance. The voice becomes a reflection chamber. We speak in ways that replicate the emotional rhythm of those we depend on. Loyalty, therefore, is not just social, it's somatic. You can tell when you've crossed the line from empathy to erasure because the voice loses its resonance. It starts to sound flat, compliant, overly careful. A voice that was once alive becomes tuned to the frequency of safety. The cost of harmony. The most dangerous rules are the ones that never feel like rules. The expectation to be agreeable, grateful, humble, or strong, they sound like virtues, but inside the nervous system, they operate as restraints. When you are rewarded for harmony, the body develops a subtle addiction to approval. Each smile or nod from others delivers a microdose of dopamine. The cycle is self-reinforcing. Approval calms anxiety. Silence prevents rupture. Compliance maintains connection. But eventually, the system collapses under its own weight. The dissonance between the words you speak and the truth you feel becomes too wide to sustain. The vagus nerve, unable to reconcile the conflict, begins to oscillate between sympathetic drive, fight-flight, and dorsal withdrawal, freeze-fawn. You alternate between burnout and numbness, rage and exhaustion. The language that once secured a connection now erodes coherence. In NSL, this state is known as regulatory fragmentation, the nervous system's inability to find a stable baseline because truth and safety remain misaligned. It's why so many people in high-functioning, high-approval roles eventually crash. The tone of belonging becomes the sound of depletion. Moral debt and emotional currency loyalty often disguises itself as morality. You tell yourself, I owe them, they've done so much for me, or I can't just leave. But beneath those words lies an ancient barter system, an emotional economy in which guilt replaces gratitude and debt replaces love. Evolutionary psychology explains this as reciprocal altruism, the survival benefit of mutual obligation. But when emotional reciprocity becomes moral compulsion, guilt hijacks loyalty. The nervous system confuses compliance with integrity. You begin to equate saying no with betrayal. In MLH language, this is debt discourse, syntax that anchors connection in repayment rather than resonance. Every I owe them is a linguistic bridge between past safety and present suppression. The words carry an emotional residue, an imprint of earlier power dynamics where love was conditional. Over time, this moral debt accrues interest. You stay in jobs that drain you, relationships that silence you, and communities that no longer reflect your truth, not because you want to, but because you feel linguistically indebted. The body, trained to equate duty with worth, resists freedom as though it were disloyalty. False loyalty. As a trauma response, trauma survivors often confuse loyalty with safety. When you grow up in environments where connection is unpredictable, you cling to stability at any cost. You learn to read the emotional temperature of others and adjust your tone accordingly. This hyper-attunement feels like empathy, but it's actually hypervigilance. False loyalty says, if I can keep them calm, I'll stay safe. So you anticipate needs, apologize quickly, and explain excessively. You call it being understanding, but the body knows it as surveillance. From the NSL perspective, this is the fawn response masquerading as devotion. The nervous system, desperate to avoid threat, adopts appeasement as its main regulatory strategy. Your tone flattens, your chest tightens, your words smooth over tension before it can surface. The paradox is cruel. The very habits that once protected connection now prevent intimacy. You can't be truly close to anyone while performing the role that keeps you accepted. Tone, as a barometer of truth tone, reveals what words conceal. The body cannot fake congruence for long. A sentence may sound calm, but if the throat tightens, the listener feels the dissonance. Neuroscience calls this prosodic empathy. The brain detects authenticity not through content, but through tone, pitch, and rhythm. In NSL practice, tone awareness becomes a compass for inner truth. When your speech accelerates, your body may be trying to escape. When your voice softens excessively, you may be appeasing. When your tone stabilizes, steady breath, grounded rhythm, you are likely speaking from coherence. In MLH, tone functions as a mirror of emotional alignment. The voice either echoes others or resonates from within. When you hear yourself adopting the language of reassurance, it's fine, you're right, I get it, pause. Ask, am I resonating or replicating? The difference marks the line between empathy and self-abandonment. When the tribe becomes a cage, communities built on shared pain often mistake sameness for safety. Whether in activism, spirituality, or recovery, the collective language of belonging can become its own prison. You learn the right words, the correct moral tone, the expected story arc deviation is treated as betrayal. Neuropsychologically, this reflects the comfort of predictive coding, the brain's tendency to prefer familiar patterns, even harmful ones. Unfamiliar language triggers uncertainty, and uncertainty activates vigilance. So the group unconsciously polices speech to preserve physiological calm. The echo chamber becomes a nervous system feedback loop. In NSL, this is collective co-regulation. Many bodies maintaining a shared emotional state, mistaking agreement for safety. But true safety is not sameness, it's capacity. It's the ability to tolerate difference without disconnection. Belonging that depends on uniformity will always demand the suppression of curiosity. Authentic loyalty does not silence, it expands. It allows contradiction without collapse. But to reach that point, you must risk disobedience, to let your tone deviate from the group rhythm, and trust that connection can survive it. The moment of break, every transformation begins with dissonance, the uncomfortable sense that your body no longer fits its role. It might surface in a conversation where you hear yourself say, it's okay, and something inside whispers, no, it's not. Or when you laugh to smooth tension and feel your stomach twist. Or when you stay silent while another crosses a boundary and your breath stalls in protest. These are micro-revolutions, moments when the nervous system refuses to recite the old script. They feel terrified because they challenge the contract of loyalty. But they are also signals of growth, the body reclaiming its native rhythm after years of forced harmony. From a mirror linguistic lens, this is the sound of the authentic self-returning, tone shifting from mimicry to originality. The words don't need to be perfect. What matters is that they belong to you. Even a shaky truth vibrates more powerfully than a polished performance. Neurophysiology of speaking up. When you finally speak a truth that breaks an old rule, the nervous system reacts as though it's facing a physical threat. Heart rate spikes, palms sweat, voice trembles, signs of sympathetic activation. But if you stay present through that wave, something extraordinary happens. The vagus nerve recalibrates. Instead of shutting down, freezing, or lashing out, fighting, it learns to stay open during honesty. This is the biology of courage. Repeated experiences of safe truth-telling literally widen your window of tolerance. The next time you speak a boundary or express a dissenting opinion, your body recognizes the pattern. We've survived this before. The neural circuitry of authenticity strengthens. The grammar of fear begins to dissolve. Loyalty redefined true loyalty is not obedience but presence. It is not staying the same, it is staying real. It is the ability to hold a connection through change rather than conformity. In NSL, this looks like physiological synchrony without fusion, the ability for two nervous systems to co-regulate while remaining distinct. In MLH, it's linguistic differentiation, speaking in harmony without echo. Your tone aligns with others' emotions but retains the timbre of self. You listen deeply, but you do not dissolve. This is the language of mature belonging, resonance instead of replication. Reflection prompt, pause for a moment. When did loyalty become self-abandonment? Whose approval still governs your tone? Which groups, beliefs, or relationships require you to translate truth into politeness? Where does your body tighten when you start to disagree? Notice that reaction. It is not disloyalty, it is data. Your nervous system is simply revealing where authenticity and safety are still divided. The work is not to choose one over the other, but to teach your body that they can coexist. Once loyalty is redefined, the next challenge emerges, guilt. Because when you finally speak differently, the old system interprets it as betrayal. Your physiology echoes that judgment. Guilt becomes the body's alarm that you have left the familiar. In element 4, the guilt of disobedience, we'll explore why breaking old rules feels dangerous, how guilt and shame disguise attachment fear, and how the nervous system learns to interpret honesty not as rebellion, but as safety. For now, remember, loyalty that costs your truth is not devotion, it is disconnection in disguise. Belonging begins where performance ends. Psychological insight. The guilt of disobedience. To disobey a rule that once kept you safe is to awaken every alarm inside the body. Even when the mind knows the rule is outdated, that it belongs to another era, another self, the nervous system doesn't distinguish past from present. It feels dangerous where there is only one difference. That feeling has a name, guilt. Guilt is not always a moral signal. Sometimes it is a physiological echo, the body remembering the cost of breaking a pattern. And until we understand its language, guilt will continue to masquerade as conscience, when it's really just conditioning. The inheritance of obedience. Every child learns early that safety depends on someone else's approval. A raised eyebrow, a withheld smile, a sharp tone, these microsignals shape our moral architecture before we ever encounter words like right or wrong. To stay safe, we learn obedience, the art of anticipating another's needs before they're spoken. When a caregiver's love was unpredictable, the nervous system adapted by overregulating, scanning faces, softening voice, shrinking posture. Each gesture was a kind of prayer. If I stay good, I'll stay safe. That prayer eventually becomes a personality. What we call morality often begins as fear dressed as virtue, a learned pattern of self-restraint that ensures inclusion, not integrity. And guilt, the aftertaste of potential rejection, becomes the body's internal compliance mechanism, a self-governing code that keeps you from ever needing to risk exile again. The MLH, mirror linguistic hypothesis, frames this as reflected authority. Our inner voice inherits the tone of those who once defined our safety. You may hear a parent's sigh in your hesitation, a teacher's disapproval in your silence, a community's judgment in your self-censorship. Each echoes through the nervous system, disguised as my own voice. From the NSL, nervous system language perspective, guilt is not purely emotional, it is neurophysiological. It triggers mild sympathetic arousal, quickened breath, heat in the chest, constriction in the throat, followed by a dorsal dip, the freeze of submission. You call it remorse, but your body calls it protection. Polyvagal pathways, the safety code beneath guilt. To understand why guilt feels like danger, we must look at the polyvagal ladder. At its base lies the dorsal vagal system, responsible for shutdown, stillness, and collapse. Above it, the sympathetic system fuels fight or flight, movement without safety. At the top sits the ventral vagal complex, where calm engagement and relational connection occur. When you break an internalized rule, the nervous system doesn't simply analyze the moral implication. It detects a relational breach. If the rule once guaranteed attachment, be quiet, be useful, be pleasing, disobeying it registers as social danger. The body slides down the ladder, heart rate increases, muscles tighten, tone flattens. You are not guilty in a moral sense. You are relationally dysregulated. This is why self-expression often feels unsafe even in adulthood. The body is not reacting to the present. It's replaying the physiological sequence of childhood disapproval. Each time you speak differently, you trigger a memory encoded not in words, but in the rhythm of your breath. Guilt, therefore, is not simply a feeling of wrongdoing, moral agency inverted. Instead of empowering responsibility, it weaponizes it against the self. You take on guilt to avoid the helplessness of randomness. In this way, guilt becomes a stabilizer, a form of pseudo-safety. It's easier to feel responsible than powerless. But this moral overreach keeps the nervous system in chronic vigilance, forever scanning for what it should have done differently. The price is peace. The mirror linguistic frame views this as semantic inflation, language that overstates more responsibility until it collapses into self-blame. Phrases like, "It's my fault," "I should have known," "I could have done more" reinforce an identity of eternal repair. To heal, you must downsize your moral vocabulary to name what is truly yours and return the rest to silence. From moral to somatic guilt, it helps to distinguish between two types of guilt. 1. Moral guilt signals a real misalignment between your values and your actions. It's clean, directional, and leads toward repair. The nervous system may activate, but regulation follows once the repair is made. 2. Somatic guilt arises when the body confuses difference with danger. It's sticky, repetitive, and disproportionate. No amount of apology resolves it because it was never about the act. It's about safety. You can tell the difference by your body's response. Moral guilt lessens after accountability. Somatic guilt persists despite it. One says make amends. The other says make yourself smaller. When you begin differentiating the two, your inner dialogue shifts. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What safety am I trying to protect?" That is the turning point where guilt becomes teacher instead of jailer. Reframing guilt as growing pain guilt is often the first sensation of a self expanding beyond its old cage. It is not regression, it is recalibration, the nervous system adjusting to freedom. Each time you assert a boundary, speak a need, or contradict an inherited rule, your body interprets it as defection. The pang you feel afterwards is simply the body stretching to accommodate a new truth. In this sense, guilt is a developmental milestone. Children feel guilt when they first disobey. Adults feel it when they first differentiate. The emotion remains the same, but its meaning evolves. From an NSL lens, growth-induced guilt is ventral tremor, small oscillations between old fear and new safety. The body is learning to remain open while integrating differences. You may shake, cry, or feel waves of relief and dread at once. That's not a malfunction. Hypothesis frames this as semantic reflection. Language mirrors emotional state, but when repeated without reflection, it becomes an echo chamber of identity. Once the phrase is seen as a mirror rather than a truth, it loses authority. The body begins to test alternatives. Step 3. Rewrite in the tone of truth. Rewriting a contract isn't about reversing polarity. "I don't care anymore," that only mirrors defiance. It's about shifting tone. In NSL terms, tone precedes meaning. The nervous system interprets vocal prosody before it decodes syntax. So the rewrite begins with breath. Take the phrase, "I have to keep the peace." Exhale completely, then inhale until the ribs soften outward. Now speak, "I can speak calmly and stay connected." The difference is immediate. The body hears possibility instead of pressure. Each time you pair breath with new language, the vagus nerve records safety instead of strain. This is not affirmation, it's physiological re-education. The consent rewrite, a recurring exercise used in trauma-informed communication circles. The consent rewrite follows 4 layers. 1. Identify the pattern. Choose a relationship where your language feels rehearsed. 2. Name the hidden rule. Complete the sentence. "If I don't, I'll lose." 3. Rephrase for coherence. Translate obligation into choice. "I can and still belong." 4. Anchor through tone. Speak the new line aloud on an exhale until the body softens rather than braces. Each repetition strengthens ventral coherence, the state where social engagement and self-expression coexist. In this place, truth no longer threatens attachment. A listener once wrote after practicing this, "When I said I can rest and still be loved, my shoulders dropped like they'd been waiting for permission my whole life." That is the nervous system signature on a new agreement. From obedience to authorship psychologically, rewriting a contract is the process of moving from introjection to integration. Introjection means swallowing someone else's rule whole, parental, cultural, or relational, without digestion. Integration, by contrast, is conscious assimilation, keeping what nourishes, releasing what constricts. Every time we update our language, we engage in neural pruning. Synaptic pathways associated with fear-based phrasing weaken, while new circuits of agency strengthen through repetition. Neuroplasticity, in its quiet way, is the body's legal department updating the terms of service. Yet rewriting doesn't happen through intellect alone. You can understand a rule's origin and still obey it somatically. The throat remembers what the mind forgets. That's why NSL insists on pairing cognitive reframing with vocal or postural change. The nervous system must feel the new contract to believe it. Linguistic restitution. In restorative justice, restitution means giving back what was taken. In linguistic healing, restitution means returning voice to the self. Each time you replace a phrase of erasure with one of truth, you return lost agency to your own nervous system. You repay the body for years of withheld authenticity. Imagine someone saying, "I don't want to upset anyone." The rewrite might be, "I can speak kindly, even if it unsettles." Notice the linguistic evolution from vocabulary, "stay small, stay safe, stay light." This physical etiquette once preserved belonging. But as we evolve towards sovereignty, the body must learn a new grammar, one that equates presence with peace rather than submission. In NSL, posture is prosody made visible. Open shoulders lengthen the breath. An even inhale tells the vagus nerve that engagement is safe. When the breath deepens, the larynx relaxes and tone steadies. Listeners unconsciously mirror that regulation. It's how calm becomes contagious. Try this small observation. Stand and speak the phrase, "I'm allowed to be here." Say it first with your shoulders slightly forward, then again with your chest lifted just enough for air to move easily. The difference is not theatrical, it's physiological. In the second version, the diaphragm participates. The statement carries resonance rather than resistance. That resonance is sovereignty embodied. Postural permission, embodied sovereignty, doesn't posture for dominance, it communicates coherence. The exercise known as postural permission begins with awareness, not correction. 1. Ground, feel both feet equally on the floor. 2. Soften, unlock the knees and release the jaw. 3. Lengthen, allow the spine to rise as if curiosity, not pride, were drawing it upward. 4. Breathe, inhale through the nose, exhale with a quiet sigh. 5. Speak, on the next exhale, voice one of your rewritten contracts. Notice that power here is gentle, authority is calm. The nervous system interprets verticality and rhythm as signals of safety. When the body leads with steadiness, the voice no longer has to prove its right to exist. This is what the MLH calls mirror teaching. Others learn how to meet you by the tone your body sets. Coherence invites coherence. The physiology of truth functional MRI studies of interpersonal communication show that authenticity activates networks associated with interoception, the ability to feel internal states. When someone speaks truthfully, even their listener's insula lights up, mirroring that internal awareness. What this means in daily life is simple. When you speak from alignment, people feel it before they analyze it. The body of the speaker and the body of the listener synchronize micro-movements, heart rate, and even blink patterns. This is physiological empathy. Sovereignty, then, is not isolation, it's a regulated connection. It says, I can stay with myself while staying with you. The cost of incongruence. When the voice says yes and the shoulders say no, the nervous system enters a split state. Breath accelerates, cortisol rises, and communication loses clarity. This is the somatic residue of broken contracts. We learn to recognize incongruence not as moral failure, but as feedback, the body reminding us that something in the statement is untrue or unsafe. A practical integration. Before a difficult conversation, stand alone for a moment and test your intended words aloud. If the phrase tightens your throat, adjust it until breath returns. That adjustment isn't a weakness, it's precision. You're tuning language to nervous system truth. The echo of apology authentic ownership often begins before speech. NSL teaches that the body must apologize before the mouth does. When remorse is genuine, the sternum naturally softens forward, the gaze steadies, and the exhale lengthens. This sequence lowers defensive arousal in both parties, enabling repair. Words delivered from that physiology land are sincerity rather than strategy. In contrast, an apology spoken from a rigid stance or elevated pitch reads as appeasement, the body still in self-protection. To practice congruent remorse, exhale fully first, allow gravity to draw the weight through your feet, then speak about physiology. The body concluded, this is how safety sounds. To unlearn those tones is not rebellion, it's translation. We are learning to interpret silence again, to rescore the soundtrack of belonging. Through the lens of the mirror linguistic hypothesis, each rewrite of language modifies the acoustic mirror that others encounter in us. The frequency of our tone, the rhythm of our words, and the pauses we allow all become invitations for new kinds of relationships. When we sound safe, others can risk honesty. Neuropsychology confirms this reciprocity. Ventral vagal regulation in one nervous system can stabilize another through voice alone. Sovereignty, then, is not isolation but stewardship of tone. We regulate ourselves so that communication becomes refuge, not a battlefield. From rebellion to reorientation, disobeying an old rule once felt like betrayal. Now it feels like alignment. The guilt that used to flood our chests is replaced by subtle awe. I can disagree and still belong. That shift is the hallmark of integration. Polyvagal theory would describe it as simultaneous activation of sympathetic energy and parasympathetic grounding, mobilized calm. In ordinary language, courage with composure. Every time we voice a truth that used to choke us, the nervous system runs a new experiment in safety. The data accumulates until conviction replaces fear. Over time, authenticity becomes automatic regulation. The evolutionary echo-human language evolved not to transmit information, but to negotiate relationships. Each sentence says, are we still safe together? When we change the grammar of our safety signals, we participate in linguistic evolution. Our micro-shifts, breathing before speaking, choosing I can over I should, are small mutations that push communication toward compassion. The MLH calls this synthetic evolution, culture renewing itself through conscious speech. The words we choose today are the nervous system DNA of tomorrow's society. Writing the new clauses to live by rewritten rules is to draft new clauses of belonging. They might sound like this. My calm is not complacency, it's clarity. Care doesn't require collapse. Disagreement is data, not danger. I can pause without disappearing. Each clause redefines emotional economics. Where once love was purchased through self-erasure, it's now exchanged through presence. In practice, you'll notice the rewrite in mundane moments. You answer a message later without panic. You admit uncertainty without shame. You ask for clarification instead of assuming rejection. These are minor linguistic revolutions, proof that sovereignty is measurable in tone, not theory. The somatic signature of truth. When coherence becomes habit, the body develops a recognizable signature. Breath moves in full cycles, the face remains expressive but unforced. There's a quiet rhythm between sentences, like the tide returning to shore. Others feel this rhythm and entrain to it unconsciously. What emerges is resonant dialogue, two or more nervous systems communicating in mutual regulation. Conversation feels alive but not volatile, intimate but not invasive. This, in the language of NSL, is ventral resonance, the physiological correlate of empathy grounded in self-trust. Integration in daily ritual integration requires rehearsal. Sovereignty is maintained through small, consistent practices. Morning check-in. Before speaking to anyone, whisper a grounding phrase such as, I meet the day, not defend against it. Micro pauses. During conversation, take a silent inhale before responding. This half-second recalibrates tone and timing. Evening reflection. Notice one moment when you honored a new rule and one when an old one resurfaced. Both are evidence of awareness, not failure. Over weeks, these micro-rituals stabilize neural pathways until authenticity feels as automatic as appeasement once did. The relational ripple. As inner coherence increases, outer dynamics rearrange. Some relationships will adapt, others will resist the new grammar. This is the social cost of sovereignty, the brief loneliness that accompanies clarity. Yet even separation can be sacred. It prevents regression into inherited tone. Think of it as acoustic ecology. When one instrument retunes, the orchestra must adjust or risk dissonance. Over time, those who value harmony will recalibrate, those who thrive on chaos will drift away. Either outcome is coherence preserved. Reflection prompt. Pause for a moment. Which rewritten phrase has begun to surface naturally in your speech? When you speak it, do you feel expansion or exposure? That sensation is the nervous system's way of marking growth. What once felt dangerous now feels true. The work of Unspoken Rules ends not with finality, but with reflection. Once we have renegotiated our internal contracts, the next terrain appears, the mirrors where those contracts once projected their shadows. After the rewrite comes the reflection. Every rule we obeyed had a face attached to it. A parent's raised eyebrow, a partner's silence, a culture's ideal. Even when we grow beyond the rules, those faces linger as after-images in perception. We no longer need permission, yet we still look for it. We no longer fear rejection, yet we brace for it. This is the territory of projection, the theme of episode 14, Mirror Ghost. In projection, the nervous system externalizes unresolved tension. What we can't accept internally appears as irritation or idealization in another. We say, they always make me feel small, when in truth, they awaken the memory of when smallness kept us safe. Understanding projection isn't about blame, it's about pattern recognition. When emotion exceeds the moment, the past is performing through us. The mirror linguistic hypothesis frames projection as echo speech, the psyche ventriloquizing its own unintegrated voices through external characters. In Mirror Ghost, we'll explore how to hear those echoes without shame, how to identify the nervous system signatures of projection, rapid heartbeat, defensive tone, tunnel focus, and translate them back into self-inquiry. The corridor between language and reflection. The movement from Unspoken Rules to Mirror Ghost is the corridor between obedience and ownership. Here, every conversation becomes a mirror maze. We test our new language against the world and see which parts of us still seek validation. This is where compassion becomes essential. Without it, self-awareness turns punitive. With it, awareness becomes integration. As you listen forward into the next episode, carry these orienting questions. When I react strongly, what earlier rule is being reactivated? Can I breathe before interpreting another's tone as a threat? What part of me is asking to be seen through this reflection? These are not analytical tasks, they're sensory. The answers live in the body's micro-movements, the tiny flinch, the sudden stillness. Mirror work begins with noticing. The ethical echo. Every time we rewrite a rule, we influence how others will hear themselves in our presence. Our coherence becomes their permission slip. In this way, sovereignty is quietly political. It alters the moral acoustics of a room. Children raised near calm voices internalize justice as dialogue rather than domination. Teams led by regulated leaders replicate safety instead of surveillance. Language reforms reality through tone more than law. This is why the closing sentiment of Unspoken Rules matters. The way we speak is the world we create. Thank you for walking through this episode, through the archaeology of your own agreements. through the muscle memory of compliance, through the rediscovery of sound as freedom. If your throat feels looser, if your breath feels more spacious, that's not a coincidence. It's the body remembering that belonging built on truth can never be taken away. As we move into Mirror Ghost, bring this steadiness with you. The next exploration will test it, always do, but it will also deepen it. Rejection, once understood, becomes empathy. What we once defended against, we can now dialogue with. We've just completed one of the most delicate turns in the Mirror Talk journey, from inherited obedience to authored truth. Remember, awareness is not rebellion, it's integration. As you move through the coming days, listen to the texture of your tone. Does it soothe or solicit? Does it echo habit or express presence? Each tone tells you which contract is operating. When uncertainty arises, return to your breath. It is the most honest clause in any agreement. As we close, thank you once more for joining me today. Speak what was once unspeakable, softly, clearly without apology, and let the world adjust around your truth. Until next time, you've been listening to Mirror Talk, the language of the nervous system. I'm James Miller.